As Paul Revere and William Doss raced west towards Lexington from Boston that fateful night of April 18, 1775, another predominant patriot, Wentworth Cheswell, was headed north. In fact, Wentworth was so integral in the colonists' fight for freedom, he's considered a founding father. But have you ever heard of him? When writing my liberating letters, I purposely sought out stories of patriots and events that weren't well known, have not been promoted and taught in schools, and have been forgotten to society, especially the stories of minorities and females crucial to the cause of freedom. As we spend the year celebrating America's 250th birthday, I'm going to highlight events and people not only pivotal in our journey to independence, but other truths of our founding that have been lost to history. So here's my 2 cents on the Midnight Ride History Forgot. I would imagine the vast majority of us are aware of the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere.
The British are coming! The British are coming!
Many are also aware that William Doss rode with him. However, very few know anything about a third rider named Wentworth Cheswell, whose contributions that night and throughout his life were as crucial to this country as Paul Revere's. Now, Richard Cheswell was an enslaved black man at the beginning of the 18th century in the town of Exeter, New Hampshire. From what we have learned from land deeds and other documents, he was estimated to be free by 1710. However, it's unsure whether he was freed by his owner, David Lawrence, or Richard bought his own freedom. Indentured servitude was also still practiced at the time, so it is possible Richard fulfilled his contract and then went free. Regardless of how it happened, Richard was a free black man by the 1710s. Richard was the earliest known ancestor of his genealogical line in America. He purchased 20 acres of land on October 18, 1717, in what became part of the town Newmarket. It's about 13 miles west of Portsmouth and 60 miles north of Boston, making him the first known black landowner in New Hampshire. From what was discovered in historical documents, Richard Cheswell and Jane Josie, a white woman, had a son, Hope Still Cheswell, out of wedlock. Jane eventually married Edward Cate and had children of their own, giving Hope Still half-siblings. Hope Still is recorded as mulatto in multiple records, a common term at the time simply meaning of mixed race, and was a free black man from his birth. Hope Still was a successful house builder and carpenter, lending his talents to the Bell Tavern in Portsmouth, the John Paul Jones Home, who was a Revolutionary War patriot and the father of the American Navy, and the Reverend Samuel Langdon House, a pastor in Portsmouth who was later appointed president of Harvard College in 1774. In addition to carpentry, Hope Still farmed over 100 acres that he purchased, as well as becoming part owner of a sawmill. He married Catherine Keniston, a white woman, and they had Wentworth Cheswell, who was born April 11, 1746, in Newmarket. They named their son in honor of the prominent New Hampshire Wentworth family, of which Benning Wentworth was governor at the time. Hope Still's good fortune allowed him to provide a formal education for his son at Governor Dummer Academy in Byfield, Massachusetts, a privilege unseen by most, especially a descendant of a former slave. Wentworth studied for 4 years, receiving an extensive education, which included such disciplines as Latin, Greek, reading, writing, arithmetic, as well as swimming and horsemanship. Following his graduation in 1765, Wentworth returned home to become a schoolteacher in Newmarket. Like his father and his grandfather before him, Wentworth became a landowner, purchasing his first plot of land from his father. Within 2 years, Wentworth had 30 acres of land, owned a pew in the meeting house/church, and married 17-year-old Mary Davis. A year later, he and his wife welcomed the first of their 13 children. By 1770, his estate had grown to 114 acres. In 1768, at the tender age of 22, Wentworth was elected town constable, becoming the first known black man to hold public office in the Americas. In fact, He held some sort of public government office every year until his death in 1817, including selectman, auditor, scrivener or notary, assessor, coroner, town moderator, and justice of the peace. The only exception was for the year 1788, of which he did not hold an office at that time. Don't know why. His signature can be found on multiple government documents confirming his contributions to the town in a governmental capacity. However, it was his election as the town messenger for the Committee of Safety that introduced him to Paul Revere and gave him a prominent part in American history. As there were no phones, TVs, radios, text messages, or even telegrams at the time, messages traveled by carriers, usually on horseback. The Committee of Safety was a lifeline of the American Revolution, carrying intelligence and messages between tactical command centers even before the shooting began. Wentworth was responsible for taking news to and from the Provincial Committee located in Exeter. When the British warships Scarborough and Conso were headed to Fort William and Mary on December 13, 1774, in attempts to retake it, Wentworth and Paul Revere rode to Portsmouth to warn the citizens. Wentworth continued on to Exeter with instructions for the troops traveling to Portsmouth. 4 months later, when the British arrived to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, as well as take the colonists' weapons and ammunition, Wentworth was again there. While Paul Revere and William Doss rode west, Wentworth rode north, alerting the Minutemen that the British are coming. A third of the men rushing to confront the retreating redcoats were notified by Wentworth. Wentworth was a patriot to the core. When Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, John Hancock, Benjamin Franklin, and the 52 other signers stated, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." They were not alone. They were following the lead of the citizens. Just months before the Declaration of Independence was written, on April 12, 1776, Wentworth and other citizens of all New Hampshire signed their own document called the New Hampshire Association Test, pledging to take up arms against the British at the risk of their lives and fortunes. This document not only supported and encouraged the Second Continental Congress to declare independence from Britain in July, it let those delegates know the citizens were serious. The delegates weren't declaring independence hoping the people would follow. The people, like Wentworth, were leading the charge. But Wentworth did not just lend his signature to the cause. He enlisted in Colonel John Langdon's company of light horse volunteers, which participated in the first major victory for the Patriots in the American Revolution at the Battle of Saratoga on September 19, 1777. A month later, on October 31st, his service ended and he returned home where he was needed to support his family. Wentworth continued teaching as well as running a store next to his schoolhouse. His enlistment and service are well documented in muster rolls and other military papers. The following spring, Wentworth was elected to participate in the convention to draft New Hampshire's first constitution. Unfortunately, for some unknown reason, he was unable to attend. Following the war, in addition to all his other duties, Wentworth began a personal campaign to copy town records, beginning in the year of the town's incorporation of 1727. He included notes of church meetings, old stories of Newmarket up to the current events, and other town information. He also wrote assessments on local artifacts and relics, which granted him the title of New Hampshire's first archaeologist. Wentworth also helped found the Newmarket Social Library in 1801 to preserve and share much of this information, along with other important books, documents, and manuscripts. Upon his death from typhus on March 8, 1817, Wentworth willed his personal library to his wife for her use. Upon her death, he instructed it to be sold in whole to one of his heirs for the highest bid, with the funds being shared equally among all of the children. His collection was sold, but the benefactor is unknown, as well as the location of the books. Wentworth is buried on his family farm along with his wife, Mary, and many of their descendants. Appropriately, Wentworth rests beneath an official Revolutionary War tombstone. Since Wentworth was only a quarter black, many believe his features favored those of his white ancestors more so than his African grandfather, Richard's. In fact, Wentworth was listed as white in census reports. However, enough records exist to prove of his African heritage as well as his immense contributions to the freedom of America. As a matter of fact, during the 1820 Missouri Compromise debates, abolitionists used his life as an example that blacks can be socially equal to whites. Regardless, after a few generations, many of his progeny had no idea they had African blood in their veins or that their ancestor was so active in the formation of this country. Wentworth Cheswell was a leader in the classroom, the church, and the community. He preserved history, both written and physical. He selflessly served his community and his country his entire adult life. He was a teacher, a veteran, and undoubtedly one of America's founding fathers. We, as Americans, owe it to patriots like Wentworth to discover and share their stories of liberating America. They deserve to be honored for their bravery, not forgotten to history, especially as we celebrate the 250 years of independence we've benefited from because of their actions and sacrifices. But we don't just have to sit on the sidelines. We must carry on their patriotism. Here's one way. Did you know that American patriots like Wentworth have thousands of descendants each? You could be one of them. Reach out to your local daughters or sons of the American Revolution chapters whose goals are patriotism, education, and historical preservation. They'd be happy to help you to research and discover your heritage. You can find out more in the link below to my particular DAR chapter and become part of history. You can also find many more stories of heroic patriots like Wentworth in my blog, Liberating Letters, on thefactspaper.com, along with other videos I've published. Thank you for watching, and God bless America.